Tonight we open the door you were told to keep shut, the one that creaks at the edge of science and nightmare. We're not summoning dragons or movie monsters. We're inviting back real things, engineered by evolution, field-tested by deep time, that would snap today's food webs like brittle twigs. Before we jump in, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. Then imagine that place with new shadows moving through its rivers, coasts and skies. The rules are simple. Mostly facts, zero mercy, and just enough sarcasm to cope with the ecological carnage we're about to describe. Before we roll out the fossils with bad intentions, let's agree on what break the food chain actually means. First, there isn't a chain that's a primary school drawing. Sun, grass, rabbit, fox, neat little arrow to a happy ending. Real ecosystems are webs with so many crossed lines they look like a conspiracy board. Energy drips down from sunlight and plants, sure, but what really shapes who eats whom is power, fear and timing. Break, in this context, means you add a creature so oversized, so efficient or so ecologically noisy that the web stops behaving like itself. Prey stop feeding where they used to. Competitors vacate entire neighborhoods. Nutrients move on different highways. The soundtrack changes from birdsong to silence, and the silence has teeth. Ecologists have a polite term for this: trophic cascade. You alter the top and it echoes to the bottom. Apex predators don't only reduce prey numbers, they rewrite prey behavior. That's the landscape of fear, an invisible fence drawn with adrenaline. Deer avoid open banks at dusk. Fish hug the benthic dark instead of cruising the sunlit shallows. Nesting birds shift from social to paranoid. Plants previously chewed to nubs suddenly get a chance to grow tall. Algae bloom or vanish depending on who's gulping the grazers. And none of this requires mass slaughter. A few well-timed ambushes each season can change the entire day planner of an ecosystem. Terror turns out to be an efficient manager. Now think of the web as an economy. Energy is currency. Herbivores are payroll. Predators are taxation with fangs. Scavengers are the waste management crew, which is why the system doesn't choke on carcasses. And then there are keystone species, the underappreciated engineers, sometimes a hunter, sometimes a herbivore, that hold the architecture together. Remove the keystone and the arch drops. Add the wrong keystone from the past, say an apex built to bully Miocene seas or Cretaceous rivers, and the arch doesn't just drop, the building changes purpose. The cathedral becomes a bunker. When we say one of these extinct animals would break things today, here's the test we're quietly applying. 1. It forces a multi-level reorganization, not just fewer seals or more geese, but measurable shifts in plants, invertebrates, microbes, even sediments. 2. It displaces modern apexes and shoves them into side hustles. Orcas don't govern anymore, they scavenge. Crocodiles stop being landlords and start being evictees. 3. It hijacks nutrient flow. Carcasses appear in new places. Iron, nitrogen rain in the wrong seasons. Rivers export fear instead of salmon. 4. It rewrites human behaviour, not as a footnote but as policy. Shorelines close, fisheries go bankrupt. Low tide becomes not safe. Let's get concrete about the mechanisms, because monsters aren't magic, they're physics with appetites. Body size matters. Big animals require big territories and big meals. They compress smaller predators like a boot flattening moss. That's mesopredator suppression in action. Mid-level hunters, sharks, crocs, wolves, catfish, whatever your biome offers, drop in number or retreat into the ecological broom closet. You don't notice at first. Then rodents spike because mid-size hunters are fewer. Then disease rates rise because rodents are nature's favourite epidemiologists. Then you notice. Hunting style matters. An ambush specialist, think crocodilian patience with submarine stealth, creates no-go zones. Whole shorelines become psychological cliffs, even for animals that never get caught. A chase predator with high stamina explodes the timetable. Prey burn more calories fleeing, feed less, reproduce later. A specialist that fixates on one high-calorie prey, large fish, whale calves, mega herbivore juveniles, can detonate the support beams of a community. A generalist does a slower kind of violence. It trims everything just enough that nothing quite recovers. Thermal biology matters. A giant ectotherm that thrives in warm water turns tropical wetlands into quiet graveyards after sunset. A massive endotherm that patrols cold currents hoovers up energy that once circulated through entire guilds of smaller predators. This is the part people forget. Predators don't create energy, they redirect and concentrate it into themselves. When the top tier becomes a biological black hole, you feel the gravity everywhere else. Reproduction and turnover matter. Modern food webs are already under stress: overfishing, habitat loss, warming, acidifying, pick your poison. Substitute today's stressed prey for yesterday's abundant prey, and you get overshoot. The newcomer's kill rate doesn't match the prey's rebound rate. Populations dip below recovery thresholds. That's called depensation, the nasty slide where scarcity breeds more scarcity. You don't bounce back easily from that. You spiral. And then there's the nutrient pump, the system few people see but everything breathes. Big migratory animals subsidize ecosystems by moving nutrients between places. Whales fertilize the sea surface with iron-rich feces. Salmon smuggle ocean nitrogen up into forests. Hippos transfer grassland carbon into rivers with their contributions. Change who lives, who dies, and where carcasses end up, and you change the productivity of everything. Scavengers assemble, microbes feast. Sometimes oxygen crashes and you get dead zones. Sometimes productivity spikes in weird places and you get blooms at the wrong time. The web politely protests. What about the comforting myth that nature adapts? Sure, on a geologic schedule. On a human schedule, adaptation looks like collapse followed by whatever can tolerate the mess. If that sounds cynical, ask a coral reef about heatwaves or a kelp forest after sea urchins get a free pass. Systems adapt by becoming different systems. If you like the old neighbourhood, you'll call it broken. If you're a jellyfish, you'll call it opportunity. It's also not just about death counts, it's about time budgets. Animals live on a knife edge of minutes. Minutes spent feeding, resting, hiding, courting. Predators change the ledger. Add a nightmare from the fossil record, and every skittish grazer, every shoreline bird, every basking reptile recalculates the cost of daylight. Less feeding means less fat, fewer eggs, smaller litters. Next year's population is already smaller before anyone becomes a snack. The hunt is a story. The math is the ending. And yes, humans are in the web whether we like it or not. Our fisheries are built on assumptions about who eats whom and how fast, calibrated to a past century's ocean. Our farm drains feed estuaries that feed birds, that feed predators, that keep rodents out of granaries. We stack coastal cities beside river mouths because we pretend the river mouths are tame. Insert a deep time apex and those assumptions combust. The risk budget of a working waterfront changes overnight. The tourist economy learns new vocabulary. Insurance actuaries develop migraines. You might object. Didn't reintroducing wolves help a national park? Sure, context matters. Put a historically present predator back into a system that evolved with it, and you can get a revitalizing jolt if the habitat still remembers how to be itself. But that's not what we're doing here. We're flirting with anachronism, dropping engines from another era into a chassis that's been rebuilt 3 times and filled with cheap gas. We're not restoring, we're remixing with bass so heavy it shakes the house off its foundation. So the ground rules, carved not in stone but in bite marks. If an animal causes cascading behaviour shifts across guilds, displaces current apexes, reroutes nutrients, and forces humans to redraw maps, it qualifies as a breaker. If it merely adds drama without rewriting budgets of energy and fear, it's just a headline with better teeth. And because the modern web is already stretched thin, warming seas, fragmented forests, invasive this, hypoxic that, the threshold for break is lower than your nostalgia thinks. 1 oversized arrival is enough to flip a switch. 2 create feedbacks. 3 start pulling bricks from the bottom as well as the top. Imagine a coastline at dawn. By rights, it should hum, sandpipers stitching the water's edge, mullet flicking under ripples, crabs scribbling hieroglyphs in the wet. Now imagine a presence that turns that hum into a held breath. The birds delay flights, the fish stay deep, the crabs work under moonlight instead. Plants grow taller in places, algae takes over in others. You didn't watch anything die today, but you watched a rhythm go missing. That is what breaking the food chain looks like. Not just blood in the water, but music gone wrong, melody replaced by a single, relentless drum. Imagine opening the ocean like a book and finding the margins chewed off. That's what a return of the giant would look like. Not a single dramatic jump scare breach, but a season of missing pages. Start with the tooth, a triangle the size of your palm with serrations like a bread knife for gods. We don't have its bones. Sharks leave us cartilage, which rots like gossip. What we have are teeth and dense vertebral discs, and from those a silhouette forms, a torpedo of muscle and liver oil, perhaps 15 meters on a conservative day, maybe more on a rude one, powered by a tail that could turn seawater into shrapnel. Whatever exact number you pick, the story is the same, a mouth that edits whales. It didn't hunt fish the way you swat flies, it hunted whales the way wolves plan around elk. The technique was ugly and efficient. Fossil ribs and vertebrae of Miocene baleen whales carried bite marks that look less like feeding and more like disablement. A targeted tactical violence. Aim for the chest, the flippers, the tailstock, snap the steering, and a whale becomes a very big bag of calories with no brakes. Picture a grey calf tucked close to its mother in warm calving shallows. Now picture a dark mass below, not charging like a movie shark, but rising like geography. Quiet, certain, patient. The first impact isn't a bite so much as an argument with the physics. The water explodes, bones protest, the pod scatters because fear inherits faster than DNA. It didn't live everywhere equally. Warm, productive coastlines were its food courts. The evidence we have, size classes of teeth clustered in ancient embayments from Panama to Japan to Florida, whispers about nurseries, shallow warm waters where juveniles grew up gnawing on smaller prey until their heads caught up with their appetites. Adults patrolled continental margins and offshore highways, cruising the places whales convene, migration corridors, upwelling zones, the way stations of a marine pilgrimage. If you're a top predator with a metabolism that runs hotter than a typical shark, call it mesothermy, call it regional endothermy, call it no-chill physiology. You can swim farther, faster, and keep hunting in water that would slow a regular shark to a sulk. But heat has a bill. You pay in calories, and the only bank that can cash checks that big is made of blubber. Numbers make the romance ugly, so let's share a few. Bite force estimates run into 6 figures in newtons, enough to crater bone, to turn ribs into punctuation. Teeth, crowns pushing 15 to 18 centimeters, arranged in rows like a conveyor belt that prints ruin. Growth rings in vertebrae suggest lifespans measured in decades. A veteran, not a mayfly. And if you're wondering whether it was just a larger great white, that's like calling a freight train just a longer bicycle. Similar in broad strokes, Big body, big appetite, coastal haunts, but built for different economics. White sharks are terrifying accountants. This thing was a hedge fund that bought oceans. Now throw it into today's sea and watch the ledger flip. Modern whales have rebounded in some regions, which is adorable and would look to this animal like a buffet that restocked itself. Calving grounds in subtropical bays become contested airspace. Migratory bottlenecks, narrow shelves, canyon mouths, island chains, turn into toll gates levied in flesh. Cow-calf pairs learn to hug deeper water by day, push shorelines only at night, and even then with a nervous choreography that leaves less energy for nursing and less time for feeding. That's the landscape of fear, marine edition, not bodies but behaviour, failing quietly. The calves that do make it are smaller. The mothers are gaunter. The next generation is already diminished before a single headline prints. Orcas? They're today's charismatic mob bosses, but even mob bosses have neighbourhoods they won't walk at night. They're smart. Smart things avoid unnecessary fights with heavier physics. A mature giant coasts through their jurisdiction and you'd expect them to pivot, more scavenging, more fish, more clever theft along coasts where the big shadow isn't cruising. White sharks, those suburban terrors, would find themselves demoted to nervous opportunists. The places where they currently loiter around seal colonies would go quiet on bright days. No one likes to be the snack that interrupts someone else's lunch. And the deep sea, the part of the planet that depends on romance from above, it starves a little. Dead whales that now sink as catastrophic gifts, the famous whale falls that feed bone-eating worms, eel pouts, hagfish, whole arcologies of patience, would more often be dismantled near the surface or dragged into literal chaos. Fewer cathedral-scale carcasses drift down intact. Microbial blooms dim. Specialist communities go hungry. The abyss grows just a bit poorer and a lot more bored. On continental shelves, though, scavengers would flourish. Sharklets, hagfish, crabs, the whole clean-up crew turning the wake of each kill into a confetti storm. Nutrients that once travelled vertically to the deep now smear horizontally along coasts. Different winners, different losers, no vote. Human economies notice even when they pretend not to. Whale-watching fleets suddenly need marine bodyguards named weather cancellations. Insurance underwriters discover the actuarial meaning of apex. Fisheries, already threadbare in many regions, lose not just bycatch and gear to an occasional curious monster, but by indirect blows. Migratory patterns shift, prey fish alter schooling depths, and the delicate timing between plankton blooms and fish larvae hatches skews because whales aren't mixing the surface with their iron-rich pump as often or in the same places. The sea is a machine with 1,000 little cams. Push the biggest one, and the others tick in new rhythms. Yes, there would be accidents. Not the Hollywood shark eats tugboat nonsense. Metal is untasty and difficult. But a world with a mouth this size brings statistical weirdness. Something hits a hull chasing a bleeding whale. A propeller turns a kill site into chum. A silhouette on sonar appears where no silhouette should be. Coastal communities relearn ancient rules. Don't launch paddlecraft over calving grounds. Don't drag nets through blood. Don't assume dusk loves you. Most encounters end with the animal uninterested, but most is a fragile comfort measured against a pupil as big as your fist. Could this titan live in colder water? It liked warmth. Probably needed it. Cooling seas and changing currents are one suspect in its historical disappearance, along with a shifting cast of prey that grew larger and more pelagic over time, and competition from toothy newcomers that hunted in packs and thought in strategies. Today's warming seas would reopen swathes of habitat like a neon sign advertising grand reopening under new management. The subpolar buffet might still be too chilly for a prolonged banquet, but the temperate shelves and tropical corridors would glow on its map. Behind the gore, there's a neat, brutal elegance to how it would police the sea. It wouldn't need to exterminate anything, it would budget the living. A handful of decisive kills in a migratory season would ripple through the year's life strategies for dozens of species. Seabirds that time their breeding to the surfacing of bait balls find the clock off. Dolphins trade open water acrobatics for tight inshore sprints. Seals abandon photogenic beaches for rock labyrinths that break lines of sight. You don't need endless blood to change a world, you need reliable fear. And if you want the darkest detail, it's this. The ocean already remembers how to host a ruler like that. The pathways are still there, the carving bay is still warm, the canyons still ambush. Our century thinks it owns the sea because GPS works and holes are bigger. But the rules don't care about our confidence. They care about energy density and geometry. Bring back the geometry and energy will oblige. The horizon stays flat. The water stays blue. The only visible change is that sometimes the blue develops a shadow underneath, and a family of whales begins to swim faster in a way they haven't had to in 3 million years. If the ocean ever had a literary critic, this was it. The animal that didn't merely eat other whales, it edited them. Picture the skull first. A fortress of bone with cheekbones like door lintels and jaw joints that look overbuilt even by whale standards. Now add teeth, actual enamel-capped battering stakes in both jaws, the kind you don't see on modern sperm whales, because modern sperm whales have outsourced their violence to suction and deep-sea darkness. This one didn't negotiate, it wrote in bite marks. The living model in your head wants to help by offering orca. Keep the intelligence, keep the teamwork if you must, but replace the toolset with something medieval. Thick conical teeth you could roof a chapel with, the mass to shove water out of the way like it was an opinion, a cranial architecture braced for the sort of jaw-closing forces that make ribs confess. Modern sperm whales echolocate with a giant forehead organ, a living sonar array, and there's every reason to think this hunter pinged too. Imagine that, the ability to map a breathing, moving baleen whale in 3 dimensions through murk and moonlight, to read the echo of flippers and the airy signatures of lungs, and then bring a mouth to the exact place that ends momentum. It's not a chase. It's a calculation that happens to bleed. The Miocene world it came from was a boom time for marine mammals, crowded highways of baleen whales, porpoises, beaked whales, seals, sea cows. If you were going to design a predator for that buffet, you'd give it a fast twitch metabolism for quick accelerations and the option to cruise long distances without chilling into uselessness. You'd strap a torpedo to a battering ram and tell it to aim for the steering. That's the rumoured playbook here. Not death by 1,000 nibbles, but disable and dismantle. One hard strike to the flank or tailstock to break the rhythm, a follow-up to arteries and joints, then the long unromantic part where fat becomes heat and tomorrow's swim becomes possible. The elegance is in how little carnage you actually need. 2 perfect bites are cheaper than 20 frantic ones. Predators that last for millions of years know how to economize. Move the camera to coastal Peru, the desert that used to be sea. That's where the skull rose from rock, the kind of fossil that makes paleontologists forget to breathe. There's a wink in the name too, a nod to the author who turned a sperm whale into scripture. Only this chapter reverses the sermon. The white whale is no vengeful god. It's lunch if it's small enough, tired enough, or naive enough to swim through the wrong patch of water at dawn. How do you hunt a giant that can outswim you if it sees you coming? You don't let it see you coming. You work edges, canyon mouths, shelf breaks, places where currents scalp the ocean and funnel migrants. You patrol the silent isle between carving bays and open sea. If you have a pod, and we don't know, but the head count of modern sperm whales suggests social complexity as a decent guess. You don't pack hunt like wolves. You stage. You put bodies where they compress the options of the prey. You herd with geometry. Even alone, a hunter like this writes with presence. Whales pass through a corridor once and it's a corridor. Pass through after losing a calf and it becomes a story. Then a rumour, then a route animals avoid for a decade. That's power you don't have to exert twice. You can feel the collision with today's ocean without any special effects. Take a modern migration. Humpbacks threading up a coast to feed in plankton-rich summer waters, grey whales commuting with calves glued to their hips, fin whales cutting long, purposeful lines like knife scores on blue glass. Drop our Miocene editor into the frame. The first change is not corpses, it's distance. Mothers and calves shift offshore, then back onshore, then offshore again, trying to thread a safe needle that keeps moving. They dive more often, swim tighter, rest less. The calves nurse on a clock that's lost a few hours to panic. That's weight not gained, immunity not built, journeys that hurt more than they should. By the time statistics notice, the next generation is already smaller. Orcas don't leave the stage, but the play becomes complicated. They're absurdly smart and really good at economics. There's no shame in pivoting when a heavier predator arrives. They take fewer risks around calves when the old predator's in town. They steal more. They fish more. They turn to harassing mid-sized whales at the fringes and scavenging the messy aftermath of someone else's argument. The food web shuffles its deck chairs and pretends it meant to redecorate. The teeth deserve their own paragraph, because they're the thesis, really. Modern sperm whales swallow squid mostly. Their upper jaws are polite gums, their lower teeth are for grip and ritual more than demolition. Our raptorial throwback had no such restraint. Enamel means durability, puncture means control, and having the same artillery in both jaws means you can saw as well as crush, pin as well as pierce. Each tooth is a promise that struggling will only make things noisier. And behind every tooth is bone made thick for muscle grooves and ridges where tendons anchored, a skull roof like a workbench that's carried heavy tools for a long time. Numbers can't do this justice, but the architecture can. This was a mouth designed for jobs you wouldn't assign to a mouth unless you had already tried a wrecking bar and got bored. Set pieces sell themselves. A carving lagoon, tropical and deceitfully gentle. Pelicans scribbling the air with beaks, the surface stippled by mullet. The incoming tide brings something that isn't tide, a pressure change, a hush, in the fish that looks like nothing until it is. The mother turns, puts her body between the shadow and the calf, and there's that sound you don't forget if you hear it once. Whale on whale, the wet thunder of modern armour meeting older engineering. The water piles up on one side of an invisible body. The calf vanishes and resurfaces sideways. The second strike is precise, surgical disdain. The lagoon remembers. We don't get to choose the side effects. Whale falls, those miraculous deep-sea cathedral feasts, change their frequency and location. Instead of slow, solemn descents that cultivate entire underworlds for decades, more carcasses are shredded into surface plumes or beach themselves, half-eaten on sandy hooks where crabs and vultures write furious little obituaries. Nutrients go lateral along coasts instead of vertical into abyssal silence. The deep loses some of its occasional jackpots. The shelf communities get messy, richer in pulses, poorer in rituals. And somewhere in that rearrangement, plankton booms either bloom too early or not at all, because the big swimmers mixing the surface with their fecal iron don't use the same roots anymore, or they don't exist in the same numbers. Not blood, but timing is the wound. There's the question everyone wants to ask, but pretends they don't. What about us, floating on our faith in schedules and steel? Whales close to shore draw tourists. Whales farther offshore don't. That's a clean line through coastal economies. Fishing fleets that have learned the seasonal rhythms of predators and prey find their coordinates cursed. A killing ground is not a good place to set nets unless you enjoy confetti. And yes, incidents happen. Not because a giant wants fiberglass salad, but because a hot chase is a sloppy business. A hull intersects a pursuit line. A propeller tears a slick into sparkling bait. The ocean performs physics without a permit. Most days you see nothing except absences. The sea feels like it has secrets again, which is romantic until it's your mortgage. If you're composing a natural history prayer hoping for coexistence, there's a tiny mercy. Giants like this don't need to kill constantly. They're punctuation marks, not a continuous scream. A few successful hunts per season could bankroll a body the size of a bus fleet. That means long stretches of apparent peace, a sunrise that looks safe because it is, until it isn't. Ecosystems metabolize that kind of punctuation into behaviour. Birds breed earlier or later. Seals haul out on rocks that make terrible postcards but decent fortresses. Baleen whales take the longer route hugging currents that provide both calories and camouflage. Everything adapts by becoming something else. And then there's the rival you're thinking about, the great shark with museum-sized teeth. The fossil record hints that both patrolled the same seas for a while, which makes your pulse quicken for the wrong reasons. Predator-on-predator battles are bad business unless someone's stealing. The more likely reality is partition. One prefers ambush near edges and shallow shelves. The other likes open water interceptions and calf-haunted corridors. On heavy days, they sniff the same wind and give each other the long, respectful curve that killers understand. On desperate days, one shows up to the other's table late and leaves with scraps and scars. That's not cinematic. It's what longevity looks like. Why did it vanish the first time? Climate swung, currents redrafted the maps, prey communities shuffled, competitors diversified. Maybe carving grounds moved out from under it like a rug pulled slowly, professionally. When the cost of the body stopped matching the profit of the sea, grandeur ended as quietly as a lineage does. Fewer calves made it, then fewer still, and then the ocean went on being an ocean, as if nothing were missing. The desert kept the skull for us because stone is sentimental where water isn't. You can, if you like, stand on a modern promontory and look out over a migration route and imagine a shape under the blue that doesn't belong to our century and yet feels weirdly at home. Everything is in place, the continental shelf's edge, the canyon that concentrates fish, the warm eddies spinning off a current like a carousel for calves, the flight paths of birds that watch and wait for the boil of a hunt. The stage is built, the actors are nervous, and the only thing missing is an old director with too many teeth. Evolution wrote that part once. It could write it again. The ocean won't object, it never does. You don't meet it, you misjudge a shadow, and then you're already inside the plan. The water is the colour of tea stained by leaf tannins and silt, and the surface says harmless the way a rug says no trapdoor. Two nostrils like coin slots break the skin, a pair of eyes that look like they have made their peace with eternity. And the rest of it, most of it, belongs to the brown world below the mirror. This is not a crocodile, not really. This is the idea of a crocodile inflated to late Cretaceous scale. A brackish ambush machine the length of a bus route, armoured in roof tiles of bone, with a skull that reads like a user manual for cracking hard things that didn't want to be cracked. Start at the armour, because that's the autobiography. Each osteoderm, those bone plates under the skin, is gashed and pitted like wind-carved rock, a texture that tells you it wore its own geology. The plates are thick enough to laugh at teeth, stitched to muscle with tough connective tissue, so the whole animal is basically an articulated shield with digestive organs. Growth rings inside those bones say it didn't rush to greatness. It got there slowly, year by year, the way rivers carve valleys. Decades to bulk up, decades more to rule. The size estimates wobble depending on which fragment you trust, but multiple tons and close to 10 meters are the phrases that keep walking back into the room no matter how many times you try to modesty. If an American alligator is a piano, this is the piano and the floor that holds it up. Look at the snout. Broad, blunt, a thing designed less for needle-nose, precise stabbing, and more for levering and crushing. The teeth are not all elegant cones. Some are thick, slightly swollen, the opposite of delicate. Turtle breakers, bone-insulting pegs. Fossil shells bear the record. Perfect semicircles gouged out where a jaw closed, and the physics of disappointment followed. Dinosaur bones, too. Hadrosaur vertebrae and limbs with arc-shaped bites that match a mouth both patient and rude. Imagine the tactic. Wait at the edge where river kisses sea, brine mixing with fresh in a chemical fog that confuses everything. Let the tide deliver large, complacent things. Then edit. It didn't live in postcard jungle rivers alone. The map is bigger. Lowland floodplains, coastal swamps, estuaries, tidal creeks connected to a shallow inland sea that chopped the Cretaceous continent in half. Brackish water, muddy, salty, forever rearranging was its language. That means it rode storms as opportunities. Surge pours deer and pigs, and today feral cattle into channels they didn't mean to visit. Fish crowd into temporary spillways. Turtles march up crumbled banks to lay eggs on sand that exists for 6 months of the year. A giant alligatoroid with salt tolerance and a talent for patience doesn't hunt here so much as it collects. Everything about the head screams ambush, mathematician. Eyes and nostrils ride the skull's roof like periscopes. You can be 5 seconds from violence and only see 2 coins and a crease. The palate is a sealed hallway that lets it breathe with a mouthful of river, because drowning is for the unprepared. Somewhere in that skin, if it's anything like modern kin, are pressure-sensing organs that read ripples like handwriting. You step on the bank? That's a paragraph. A school of fish tightens, then loosens? That's a comma. A heron bolder than wisdom stabs at the shallows? That's a punchline with feathers. Now install it in a modern estuary and watch the neighbourhood redecorate itself around the new landlord. Manatees taste like vegetable butter. Otters are curious sausages with a bad sense of odds. Big red drums stack up in channels like they're queuing for a raffle. Wading birds turn their ballet into a crouch. Deer stop using the pretty open banks at dusk and blunder through the back swamps instead, where the mud pulls their ankles and the mosquitoes do dentistry. American alligators. They go from apex to tenant. You'll still see them on side canals, head-counting frogs, pretending they always like small ponds, but there's a part of the tide rhythm they start skipping because one silent calculus lesson is usually enough. It's not just who gets eaten, it's where the fear lands. A 10-meter ambush specialist turns a mouth of river into a seasonal no-go zone. Fish that used to pause at the brackish mixing front to acclimate, staging for their freshwater sprint, now sprint blind, burning calories and numbers because they can't afford the pause. That knocks salinity gradients out of sync with migration schedules. It means freshwater predators upriver miss their buffet by a week. It means eggs get laid where the nursery used to be and now isn't. Crabs scavenging the margins have a golden age. So many half-finished stories left on mud bars that it looks at first like productivity, until you realise it's the kind that steals from the future. The strike itself is both simple and theatre. The animal doesn't lunge, it subtracts distance. A slow creep, a hover where buoyancy and lung volume cancel, a final snap powered by a tail that might as well be hydraulics. Jaws shut. Water piles against the face into a sheet that slaps the bank and startles everything into making their last, worst decisions. If the target is large, you get the ritual. The twist, the roll, the river becoming a vertical centrifuge. Limbs come off, shells part along seams, soft pieces go down first. There's no nobility clause, only a physics clause. What doesn't fit becomes a stash for later under a rootwad pantry that smells like secrets. And because it's a reptile, there's a time economy mammals don't understand. Feed well, then vanish into wait mode for a week, a month longer if the water cools. One estuary can hold several ghosts like this, each claiming a bend or a deep scoured pool below a bridge, invisible until that bridge acquires a local name you won't find on maps. The energy budget scales with the heat. Warm years make fast tyrants. Cold snaps knock appetites and reflexes down a notch. But when the sun returns and the water climbs from coffee to tea to soup, elastic hunger snaps back and the chores begin anew. Nesting season is the softest chapter and still manages to sound like a threat. Picture a mound of rotting vegetation and mud sculpted just above flood reach. Thermometer set by decaying plants. Temperature decides the sex of the hatchlings. Too warm, too cold, skewed futures either way. The mother stays near because ancient armour does not preclude modern tenderness. She'll carry squeaking babies in a mouth built for disagreeing with turtles. Now drop this scene into our centuries walled and channelized estuaries. Levees cut the high ground thin. Boatwakes bite at the nest base. Coyotes, raccoons, feral hogs, and, let's be honest, unimpressed humans find the clutch. The animal adapts by moving the nursery deeper into the marsh where rescue becomes a private ceremony and trespass becomes a statistic. Competition brings comedy if you like your humour black. Bull sharks, those brackish bullies, suddenly look like mid-tier thugs who just realised the bar has a bouncer. Saltwater crocodiles in places that host them discover religion. Even big constrictors and tropical deltas, those invasive myths headlined by pet escapes, become opportunists who schedule their basking to avoid the hours when the water carries rumours. The giant doesn't have to fight them. It curates their time. That's how you rule without paperwork. Humans, of course, enter with entitlement and learn with invoices. Boat ramps turn into roulette wheels. Anglers complaining about something big taking tarpon off their lines get quiet when the something big starts taking the last 8 inches of the boat instead. Shrimp trawlers learn to new rituals around bleeding bycatch and anchor lines. Airboats, the loud, flat kind, decide that roaring over sawgrass at dusk is a hobby with actuarial notes. Warning signs sprout, then fences, then stories you won't put on the tourism board but you'll tell your cousin before he launches his kayak. You could say, well, we cohabit with big crocodilians now, we'd adjust. True, in parts. But scale isn't a cosmetic upgrade. Scale is a new category of physics. A 6-metre crocodile is a stalking hazard. A 10-metre alligatoroid is infrastructure. It moves sediment when it turns. It digs gator holes that become drought refuges so deep you can chart them on a handheld GPS. It drags carcasses into back channels that feed nutrient pulses to plankton and mosquitoes, and then to bats and swallows, and then, surprise, into your porch light halo. The ecosystem warps around the habit of this animal like a tree swallowing a fence, and the weather, because the weather always gets a vote, plays matchmaker. Hurricanes breathe across the shelf and push salt fingers far inland. Flooding braids new creeks overnight. Floodplains become lakes. Lakes become buffets with no etiquette. The giant rides the surge, returns with it, and leaves footprints in the silt the size of serving platters that the sun bakes into prehistory before lunch. Drought follows in a different year, the big one parks in the last epoxbow, and everything with thirst learns to kneel at a bar where the bartender sometimes serves the customers. Predation becomes rationing. If you're tempted to give it oversized villainy, remember the patience in the numbers. It doesn't need to kill daily. A good month can fuel a quiet season. It is not on a rampage, it's on a schedule that blends hunger with hydrology. That makes it harder to regulate, by the way. You can patrol for a serial hull bumper. You cannot patrol for a ghost that breathes twice an hour and calls that busy. You put up cameras, you get videos of water pretending to be water, you hire experts. They shrug and circle spots on a chart where people should stop behaving like cartoons. Under the sarcasm there's respect bordering on awe. This is an animal that turned the line between river and sea into a career. It understood edges, the ecotone, the grey areas where biology gets complicated and opportunities collect. It harvested those edges across a continent that used to be 2 coastlines facing each other, and it did it for so long that its armour, reads like tree rings from a life unhurried by the need to prove anything. Put it back and the edges come alive again in ways we're not ready for. The marsh grass seems to lean a different way. The herons look twice before they look down. Fishermen tell stories with fewer jokes. The tide keeps its appointments, but the appointments mean something else. And the best and worst part is how little the water has to change to welcome it. Estuaries are still sloppy and generous. Rivers still deliver the lost and the tired to the sea. Turtles still believe in sand. Our century builds dredges, promises it has mastered silt. And then one evening the last light hits a channel at the exact right angle, and you see 2 coin slot nostrils in a place where no log should breathe. You blink. The coins slide under. The mirror closes. Somewhere beneath the tea the plan keeps smiling. Start by erasing the fairy tale of the snake as a quick blur in dry grass. Replace it with heat. A swamp that feels like someone forgot to turn off the planet. Water the colour of brewed leaves. Dragonflies writing cursive in the haze. And under it all a length of muscle so long you can't hold it in your head at once. Not a myth. Not a movie prop. A Paleocene fact that once prowled what is now northern Colombia. The bones we have are not dainty. Vertebrae like clenched fists, each one announcing a body roughly the length of a city bus and change. You can argue whether that means 12 metres or 14 on a rude day. The number isn't the story is girth. An animal wide as your chest, built like an industrial cable, and heavy enough that land is a suggestion and water is the solution. Warmth was its accomplice. Big reptiles are thermodynamic bargains only when the air feels like soup. That's why the fossils come from a greenhouse Earth, when tropical temperatures brushed the 30s and the jungle didn't so much grow as overflow. Size for a snake is a temperature letter of recommendation. The hotter the average day, the bigger the body you can afford to maintain. This one cached every degree. Picture the daily routine as physics, dawn basking in a tea-brown lagoon, skin soaking radiant heat, then the slow slide into buoyancy where 100 kilos of dinner weighs like a rumour. On land, gravity would make a show of it. In water, you become a stealthy idea with eyes. The head, less a blade, more a vice. Constrictors don't need complicated mouth knives, they need a latch, a grip, and the ability to turn breath into a deadline. The skull's trick is cranial kinesis, hinged bones that let the jaws yaw into a doorway and walk over prey with backward curved teeth while a muscular throat negotiates with geometry. The glottis, a little breathing tube, pops forward so the snake can inhale around a mouthful of mammal or fish. No venom, no drama, just a quiet engineering flex, wrap, squeeze, wait. Constriction isn't a hug, it's a hydraulic failure. Blood flow to the brain stops, lungs can't expand, the heart loses an argument with pressure. Minutes stretch like taffy for everyone except the snake, whose pulse is a metronome with all day in it. You can bet it preferred water not only for buoyancy but for ambush arithmetic. Shallow lagoons and blackwater channels are camouflage you can drink. Fish, some of them big, armour-scaled holdovers from deep time, golden flickers under the surface. Crocodile forms of various flavours lurk like punctuation marks along the banks. Turtles as wide as cafe tables haul themselves up to nest. All of this moves on a schedule. Learn the schedule, own the room. Modern anacondas teach the template. You place your coils where paths cross. The cattle crossing, the capybara runway, the back eddy where fish catch their breath. And you let impatience do the hunting. Scale that up to a serpent that can loop a mid-sized crocodilian twice and still have coil left to make a point. And the wetland starts to keep different hours. There's a sensory world here that makes our eyes feel basic. A forked tongue samples water for chemical stories, delivering molecules to the Jacobson's organ for taste smell where it borders on detective work. Pressure waves from a panicked shoal slap scales tuned for vibration. Heat-sensing pits, if it had them like many boas do. would smear the world in thermal ink, warm-blooded blurs at the shoreline, a neon signature behind reeds. Vision matters least. The face is mostly a reader of intent. When the strike comes, it's not a cheetah sprint, it's subtraction. A short acceleration, a loop, a knot that tightens, and then a patience that looks like kindness if you don't understand physiology. Drop this Paleocene heavyweight into a modern equatorial wetland and listen for the sound a food web makes when it inhales. Top predators aren't just mouths, they're timekeepers. Otters stop playing at noon in open channels because noon is now a bad joke. Capybaras put on weight closer to thorn thickets and turn the banks into dirt slides because slick mud is easier to launch off when your children's survival depends on punctuation. Caimans, those smug little dragonettes, practice humility. Juveniles vanish from basking logs that used to be safe. Subadults learn the geometry of panic. Adults grow scars they pretend were from romance. Wading birds shift their rookery islands farther from feeding flats, trading commute time for the privilege of sleeping with both eyes open. Fear rearranges the furniture before a single carcass blooms. Fish feel the pressure too, literally and figuratively. A boa of this size clips off the top tiers of piscivores, big catfish, large cichlids, and yes, the occasional shark-nosed tourist who mistook the river's mouth for a friendlier party. Remove the bosses and mid-tier fish swell in number, grazing algae to a shine, and nibbling aquatic plants into lace. That seems lovely until spawning beds, once waving with vegetation, turn to scoured gravel where eggs have nowhere to hide. Meanwhile, the nutrient pump shifts. 100-kilo kill dragged into reed beds means a private bonfire for microbes, crabs, beetles, and the small opportunists of the night. Energy that once cycled broadly through open channels now coagulates in secluded corners, feeding mosquitoes that feed bats that feed owls that, if they're lucky, never stoop to the wrong ripple. This animal's metabolism plays an unsexy, decisive role. Warmth lets it run a hot idle compared to a temperate snake, but it's still a reptile with a budget-friendly engine. A single large meal can bankroll weeks. That means punctuated predation, long stretches where the wetland relaxes into apparent normalcy, shattered by events the size of memories. A caiman goes missing. A deer doesn't return from a drink. A fisher's dog vanishes in a swirl that leaves only a leashed silence whipping the surface. The ecosystem doesn't register constant slaughter. It registers an ambient rule change. Water now has rules. Reproduction writes its own subplot. Boas today are live bearers. Eggs hatch inside and a pile of miniature serpents pours into the world like rope unspooling. Scale that up and imagine a patient, gravid queen, selecting the warmest, safest oxbow she can find. She parks where the afternoon sun turns the world viscous and waits, body drinking heat and feeding embryos that are already little appetites. When birth comes, the nursery immediately explodes into statistics. Most neonates become calories. Fish, birds, other snakes. A few learn the first and most important lesson: the shallow is a liar. The survivors become rumours by next year and infrastructure by the year after. We have to talk about the physics of swallowing because it's the part that turns curiosity into awe. Jaws do not unhinge, they multiply options. The quadrate bone swings, the mandibles flex at the chin where most of us are fused, and the throat balloon becomes a conveyor. The prey's limbs fold or they don't. The snake doesn't mind, joints pop, angles soften, and the body advances in peristaltic waves of no. Hours can pass like this, the snake half submerged under hyacinth, eyes glazed, heartbeat slow as a drum at a funeral. The grotesque becomes quotidian with repetition. The wetland learns to ignore the bulging log with the wrong silhouette. Predators that can make their own silence are hard to regulate. Humans enter, inevitably, with keys to boats and a confidence problem. Netters working night channels find mesh ripped and fish missing, as if the river developed opinions. Children used to swim at certain bends at noon because the current is clever there. Noon acquires a footnote. Ranchers discover that calves at the edges of standing water are negotiation points rather than assets. And the mythology machine warms up 30 feet, boat crusher, took a man in front of his brother. Most of it will be exaggeration. Enough of it will be true that you'll read the next rumour twice. The practical response looks like fences, raised boardwalks, flashlights at the waterline, and a quiet new habit of counting heads every time a canoe noses back to the dock. Climate draws the map with a fat marker. This serpent is a heat project. It wants wetlands that feel like saunas and nights that barely cool. Warming trends lift the welcome mat in places that were formerly just shy of comfortable. Lowland Amazonia turns from good to perfect. Deltas in West Africa learn a new word for visitor. Southeast Asian swamps see their resident pythons demoted from terrifying to terrified. Salt is a partial fence. Most Boyds are not fond of it. But estuaries are creative places, and freshwater lenses ride on brackish backs like stowaways. The snake doesn't need the sea, it needs the places the sea influences. You want numbers, not exact ones, we don't get that mercy from fossils, but honest shapes. A body mass pushing a metric ton means coils with a circumference like a person's outstretched arms barely meeting fingertip to fingertip. A strike range measured not in meters but in geometry. If you're within one body width and inattentive, you're considered. A heart that can idle through days but shunts floodwater to muscle in a breath. Lung length that doubles as ballast control. Fat reserves that make hunger into a calendar rather than a whip. Longevity measured in decades, which is long enough to turn individual habits into community legend. The old one under the bridge, the river rope, the brown god. Cultures are exceedingly good at writing field guides disguised as stories. What does it do to existing apexes? It curates them. Black caimans are suddenly very interested in where they bask and whether the water is deep enough to hide a bad decision. Big cats learn that the river's edge is not a runway but a trapdoor. Jaguars that once hunted caimans with arrogant excellence are now marks if they misread a reflection. Large constrictors already claiming the venue, anacondas in South America, pythons elsewhere, become mesopredators overnight, broad-shouldered until they aren't. The safest mid-sized predators become the ones who schedule their lives around shadows. Plants react too, which is the part people skip because plants don't scream. Grazers forced off open banks into back swamps, chew different things in different places, so reed beds thicken here, lotus mats boom there, and tree seedlings either get a reprieve or a haircut depending on where hooves dare to pause. Seed dispersal by capybara guts, an underrated ecosystem service, is rerouted. Some shrubs colonize new creeks, others fade. The wetlands map redraws itself quietly, one mouthful at a time. Everything about this animal argues for a kind of tyranny that doesn't roar. It waits. It budgets. It cashes in on the fact that most creatures, including us, have to come to the water eventually to drink, to feed, to cool, to be soulful, to be careless. It doesn't own the entire swamp every minute. It owns key minutes and key places. That's enough to break a food web, not by hammering it flat, but by changing how every participant spends its day. Fear does the payroll, energy follows. If you want an image to hold on to, dawn a sheet of water flat as a lie. A line of capybaras hesitates at the cut bank, ears doing semaphore, their whiskers reading the breeze. A heron lifts one leg, considers, decides to stand on the other instead. A caiman looks like a log that learned sarcasm. Nothing moves. The surface trembles once, briefly, as if a giant exhaled beneath a blanket. Then stillness again. You could say nothing happened, and you'd be right in the way a locked door is quiet. The quiet itself is the event. The lock is breathing. Begin with the skull, because that's where the thesis lives. Long as a coffin lid and twice as personal, alligator narrow, studded with conical teeth that don't slice, they grip. No steak knife serrations here. These are fish-keeping pegs, a rosette of tooth tips near the snout's front like a bear trap designed by an engineer who really hated fins. The nostrils sit high and back as if the animal auditioned to be a submarine and passed. The bones are riddled with tiny pits, neurovascular foramina, that whisper about a face that could feel the river. Picture it nosing through tea-coloured water, reading pressure ripples the way we read headlines, and then deciding which headline to end. Everything behind the head cancels modesty. The neck is a muscular bridge. The body carries a billboard of neural spines, the infamous sail. A vertical gallery of bone slats roofed with skin. Was it for display, heat exchange, species recognition? Pick a function. You'll find a scientist to argue with you. Whatever else it was, it made the silhouette unforgettable. A river ghost with a flag. Farther back, the hips cede their old theropod bragging rights. The hind limbs are shorter, humbling the classic two-legged tyrant pose. The forelimbs are thick, with scythe claws on the first fingers like punctuation you can't ignore. Then comes the tail, deep and finned by towering spines into a flexible paddle. If dinosaurs had swim teams, this was their backstroker. Its world was North Africa in the mid-Cretaceous, a hot braided floodplain where rivers wandered and split, where sandbars moved like opinions and the shoreline with the Tethys Sea curled just off stage. The fossil beds are a jumbled banquet. Sawfish blades, coelacanth armour, giant lungfish dreams gone to stone, crocodilian parts, turtle plates the size of hubcaps. Spinosaur teeth show wear patterns and micro-scratches that read like fish stories. The chemistry of their enamel hints at lives marinated in water. Dense limb bones add another clue. Ballast. You don't need to be Jacques Cousteau to see the theme. Whether it swam like a reptilian otter or waded like an enraged heron, it belonged to the river the way lightning belongs to a storm. Now import that geometry into a modern waterway and watch exactly nothing happen for long minutes at a time. Still water. Dragonflies writing signatures on the surface. Fishermen in long low boats laying out nets over channels they have known since childhood. And beneath, a living parenthesis slides alongside the net, pauses, and with a half turn of the tail, steals a sack of fish like a magician emptying your pockets while you applaud. You don't see the animal, you see the edits. The net returns light, the channel goes quiet, the other boats drift farther apart and a rumour grows gills. Hunting here is not a sprint, it's a meeting between physics and patience. Fish stage along current seams, where fast water braids with slow, where eddies peel off cut banks, where bait balls press against the shore as if the dirt could save them. The predator parks crosswise to the flow, mouth near the seam, and the river does the conveyor belt work. A quick lateral snap, jaws close, water sheets off that long face like silk off a blade, and the victim becomes geometry. For larger prey, the metre-long sawfish, the obstinate lungfish, it adds muscle. Forelimbs dig, tail, thrashes, the body bends into a living comma that hauls dinner to the shallows. The sail tilts and flashes, a flag over a crime scene. People love to ask, but did it chase? That tail didn't evolve a good posture. In deeper runs, the animal can scull, side-to-side undulations turning the whole back half into a propeller. Not dolphin sleek, no. More like a big croc with ambition. A pursuit measured in seconds rather than minutes, enough to erase the space between hunter and the fish that made the wrong decision about which direction was away. Imagine a sequence at dusk. Mullet blitz at the surface, a silver sheet erupts. The sail carves a curve, something panics into the shallows and discovers the shore as an accomplice. The river remembers. Drop it in the Nile. The Mekong, the Orinoco, pick your artery, and the ledger starts moving numbers around. Big piscivores, giant catfish, river sharks where they still exist, the largest crocodiles, find themselves demoted. They don't vanish, they reschedule. Crocodiles give up certain bends the way former monarchs give up certain palaces, grudgingly, with scars. Otters abandon play hours except under hard sunlight, and even then with the jitter of creatures who've seen the water rearrange a friend. Wading birds push nesting islands further from the mainland and accept the longer commute to their feeding flats. A new time zone comes to the river called when the shadow patrols. Fish aren't just calories, they're clockwork. They run nutrients from sea to forest, they spike the plankton at the right weeks. They feed dozens of mouths that feed dozens more. Put a 7-ton siphon at the top of that pyramid and you don't just remove biomass, you redirect it. More kills in side channels mean more carcass grease in the reeds, which means night-blooming microbes party, which means mosquitoes thrive, which means bats and swallows have a good year, which means dragonflies jitter around noon like gossip. Meanwhile, fewer deep-water kills means fewer scraps for big scavenger fish, which seems like justice until you realise those scavengers used to vacuum up disease vectors and now those vectors linger like rumours with legs. If you want a human chapter, it's written in wood and nylon. Nets tear, long lines go slack. A wooden canoe takes an odd new gouge along its gunwale, and the owner acquires a superstition about that bend he won't put into words. Fishers adapt because fishers survive by adapting. They hug backwaters, fish at different hours, build heavier weirs that look suspiciously like forts. Some of them learn to watch for the little clues, a V-wake with no head, a flicker of brown just below the surface that is not mud. Birds lifting off a bend in a hurry even though nothing happened yet. They move their hands without thinking. That's culture. Field notes passed down as jokes that aren't quite jokes. You might be constructing a hero in your head to push back, hippos say. Hippos are belligerent lawnmowers with opinions. They also panic. A sail cutting a line across their pool at dusk turns irritable confidence into churn and calves get walled off behind adults. The pod becomes a living hedge with a heartbeat. It's not that the predator wants hippo. Hippo is too much bone, too much fury for too little reward. It's that hippo wants peace, and peace just left the building wearing a finned tail. The old croc landlords try to keep their mortgages. A saltwater crocodile in Asia, a Nile crocodile in Africa. They've got the ambush resume, but they're horizontal missiles from the bank. This thing is a bank with a missile. In the mixing water where salt teases fresh and the clarity is always lying, the spined hunter is freer to pick the angle of attack, to stay invisible in 3 dimensions instead of 2, to turn a croc's preferred ambush into a mutual surprise that the croc loses if mass and leverage get a vote. And mass and leverage always get a vote. Even the sand changes its mind. That tail, cutting, stirring, digging in the shallows while the forelimbs brace, sculpts banks into different curves. New scours appear beneath overhanging trees, creating deep pockets where none existed last year. Gator holes, but draft length. Logs roll, lodge, and start catching more logs until you've got a natural fish trap, which is great for the hunter, and a headache for a river that likes to run its errands unimpeded. Erosion accelerates here, slows there. The channel migrates like a rumour with a passport. Flood pulses ricochet off new forms, floodplains wet and dry on calendars the farmers don't recognise. One dinosaur becomes different water. We should talk about the sail again, but because you're still thinking it's just vanity. A billboard in the brown water is also a periscope of threat. Fish see the silhouette and bank harder. Birds see it and go from foraging to flight with full crops. Mammals clock it once and then somehow always remember. Displays matter too. Find another of your kind in a murky channel, and the two of you can fence with shadows, angling, flaring fins, reading the flecks of spines the way we read eyebrows. You can resolve a territorial tiff without losing a pound to tooth tax. Energy economy is the real tyranny. Alright, the fight scene you want, but nature rarely delivers. What happens when this river tyrant meets the open sea tyrant sniffing up the estuary? If the giant shark of your nightmares ever strayed into brackish water where the spined one waited, the encounter is probably nothing like your storyboard. Predators do math. One smells fish and stays, the other smells salt and leaves. If they notice each other, it's with the long politeness of old disasters passing in a hallway. Real fights between apexes are for starvation days or bad decisions. You don't last millions of years by taking coin flip bets. Reproduction? Imagine a mound, a humid, sun-baked rise of riverweed and mud chosen the way a jeweler chooses settings. Eggs sink into warmth, parents, perhaps one more than the other, we don't get to know for sure, guard with the kind of patience that makes the neighbours respectful. Hatchlings break into a world that wants them for protein. Most will oblige. A few will become thin brown lines that never quite leave the margins of the current, learning, lengthening, upgrading their menu from shrimp to fish to anything with a heartbeat that fits. There's an art to how it would silence a river without emptying it. The top never needs to eat everything. The top needs to scare everything creatively. The most efficient rulers don't chase, they choreograph. Prey stop pausing where the current offers them convenience, they move at the wrong hours, they feed light, they breed lighter. Mid-level predators switch targets and accidentally boost pests. Snail boom sliming rice paddies, for example. Until someone notices that a dinosaur didn't just take fish, it took predictability. We're bad at living without that. And the creature itself? It takes long sun stands on sandbanks no one uses anymore, the sail a shallow triangle cutting the glare, steam coming off wet hide like a rumour. It slides between worlds, bank, channel, backwater, using gravity as a suggestion rather than a rule. It owns mornings and evenings, and enough of midday to keep afternoons honest. It is not in a hurry, it is on time. If you want a last picture, try this. Pre-dawn fog hugging a confluence where two brown rivers braid into one. The water carries petals and dust and the faint smell of crushed leaves. A school of big fish holds in the seam, bodies flickering like coins in a fountain. A heron leans forward, redraws its patience, and then, half a metre off its beak, a line appears, as if someone drew a horizon under the water. The line becomes a ridge, the ridge becomes a sail, the sail becomes a mouth with a plan. The fish detonate, the fog lifts a little as if embarrassed, and the river, having shared a secret, returns to pretending it doesn't have any. Start with the shadow, not the flapping kind. This one is a moving geometry that redraws the ground while you stand on it. 2 stories tall on tiptoe, a neck like a crane boom, a head that is basically a spear with opinions, and wings that fold into draped bat-like curtains when the animal is on the ground doing what Ajdarshid pterosaurs seem to have done best: stalk. The mouth? Toothless, which sounds cute until you realise it's a sharpened beak built to pick up live struggling problems and make them stop. This isn't a gull with ambitions, this is a murder crane that learned to fly. Anatomy first, because biology did its homework on this one. The forelimb is a catapult, an absurdly elongated 4th finger supporting a wing membrane, with a little toroid bone controlling the front sail like a pilot's slat. The shoulder girdle is braced by a fusnotarium, extra vertebrae welded together to keep the frame from exploding when the launch happens. And the bones are full of air, laced with internal struts like a Gothic cathedral trading mass for strength. The neck vertebrae look like someone built a bicycle wheel inside each one. Spoke-like buttresses, lightweight tubes, a design brief that reads, "Hold up a guillotine," while pretending to be a feather trackways from relatives say it walked on all fours, narrow gauge and confident, not a clumsy bat on stilts, but a professional. Flight wasn't flappy chaos. Think soaring, thermals, long commutes between kill sites and roosts, with launch handled via a quadrupedal vault. No running down a runway with heroic flaps, more a planted crouch, an explosive spring on the forelimbs, and suddenly the air has a new problem in it. Up there it rides warm pillars like a vulture with sharper business ethics. Down here it's a patient, silent metronome, ticking across floodplains and shorelines, head bobbing, eyes low, reading burrows, drift lines, nests, mistakes. The menu's not a guess, it's theme. Ajdarshids lacked teeth and skim-feeding gear, but they carried necks long enough to make proximity optional. They were likely terrestrial gleaners, ground-stalking predators and opportunistic scavengers that plucked whatever they could swallow whole. Hatchling dinosaurs in their day, sure, but also small mammals, lizards, fish in the shallows, fledglings that didn't quite understand gravity yet. Modern translation: shorebird chicks, turtle hatchlings, leverets, prairie dog pups, fox kits ambushed outside the den. The occasional unlucky juvenile antelope if panic arranged its legs poorly at the water's edge. If you can fit it through a doorway, and the doorway is your face, that's food. Technique? Minimalist brutality. The head comes down in a jab, more herring than raptor. Then a quick grip, lift, a shake that turns spine into yes-no, and a swallow that erases evidence except for feathers that don't cooperate. No tearing, no table manners. The next clever reinforcement means this repetitive spearing doesn't snap the hardware. When the prey is wriggly and larger than advertised, the pterosaur's wings half open as outriggers while the throat solves geometry. The whole murder is quiet enough that the next nest over doesn't realise the schedule changed. Drop this animal into a modern coastal rookery at dawn and listen to the sound of missing. Terns and gulls lift and swirl into the air too late. The long head threads through panicked bodies like a needle. On turtle beaches, the synchronized sprint of hatchlings becomes a massacre of good intentions, the surf line turned into a conveyor belt of snacks. Sea lion nurseries try to cuddle into safety. The pterosaur loops the margins and lifts the small and the slow. It doesn't need to empty a colony, it needs to make mornings expensive. The rookery learns, breed earlier, breed later, breed deeper in thickets, breed not at all. A decade later, the shoreline's soundtrack has fewer arguments and more wind. Move inland, floodplain, savanna, steppe, anywhere light meets open ground. The stiltwalker patrols game trails and stock ponds like a customs officer with no paperwork. Rodents risk short dashes and become longer meals. Ground nesting birds discover that camouflage is a suggestion when an eye 6 feet above the ground is pattern matching from a different angle. Jackals and coyotes go wary near anything that looks like a runway. Mid-sized raptors arrive at carcasses and find the buffet guarded by a beak that carries the authority of a spear and a face that doesn't mind sharing, so long as sharing means, I go first, you clean my teeth I don't have. Ecology doesn't break all at once, it folds along seams. Start with recruitment failure. Shorebird populations rely on a surplus of surviving chicks. Reduce that surplus and migrations thin out. Turtles already living on the edge slide over it, fewer juveniles, a narrower future. Scavenge crews, vultures, corvids, lose meals to a taller, faster arrival. Some starve, some move inland, some try daytime larceny and get beak thumped. Mesopredators that raid nests, foxes, raccoons, lose youngsters to the stalker and alter their hours, which changes which insects bloom and which plants get their seeds moved. Fear rearranges the clock, and the clock rearranges the map. Airspace becomes a jurisdictional nightmare. Airports learn a new phrase: megabird strike. A wingspan measured in living room units intersecting with a turbofan intake is the kind of math that ends careers in aircraft. You don't haze this thing with a jeep. You redesign flight paths, zone out giant buffer zones, and accept that thermals over runways are now the province of a Cretaceous refugee. Wind farms redraw their EIS reports because a turbine blade and a pterosaur are a meeting no one can afford. Search and rescue gets called for hikers who saw a glider with legs, and rangers practice the politically correct way to say, "Don't stand between it and a cliff if it looks like it's thinking." You want a field scene. Picture a wide salt flat turned mirror by a recent rain, heat already wringing steam from the crust. The pterosaur steps lightly, feet making soft clicks as the skin dries, head cocked to read tiny ripples where brine shrimp concentrate. A sudden pivot, beak snaps, a plover chick becomes past tense. Far off, a fox mother freezes, the long shadow angles her way, and she hustles her kits into a den, while the stalker pauses by the entrance listening. It doesn't dig, it files the address. Predators with good memory don't need good claws. Predator on predator theatre, the part you paid for. What happens when it wanders into a lion's carcass party or a hyena convention? Standoff. Wings half spread make a wall of leather and light. The beak jabs at air just close enough to make a point. Lions blink and weigh cost against novelty. Hyenas consider their dental insurance. The pterosaur picks the portion its throat can accommodate and leaves on long legs. Both sides pretending this is diplomacy and not mutual caution. Eagles try to mob it and discover there's a height above ground where that beak is suddenly at your altitude. Lesson absorbed. Dignity deferred. Launch and landing are not trivial for giants, which means the animal chooses its ground like a pilot. Open approaches, no surprise wires, firm substrate. After a heavy meal, it may go grounded for hours, sunbathing on a low dune or a baked mud hummock, heat speeding digestion, muscles idling while lungs work like bellows in a light chassis. Vulnerable? Less than you'd think. A grounded crane with a spear that can puncture and a wing snap that can break a jaw is not a bargain hunt for any carnivore with self-esteem. Night brings roosts, cliff ledges, lone buttes, the flat crown of a mangrove island where the breeze keeps insects to a tolerable level. Dawn brings lift, and lift brings rounds. The body plan rewires economies of fear. Seals haul out on rockier islets, the easy beaches become haunted. Waders choose taller reeds and pay their commute tax in calories and predation from snakes they didn't have to meet before. Foxes switch to nocturnal shifts, which moves pressure onto rodents, which changes the vegetation patterns, which changes fire behaviour because different grasses cure at different times. Far inland, prairie dog towns shrink under aerial shadow, and the raptors that used to feast there migrate reluctantly, looking for new buffets that don't exist. You didn't kill a hawk, you killed the reason for a hawk. We haven't talked about sound because the animal probably didn't need much of it. Maybe hisses, maybe bill clacks, maybe low resonant grunts you feel more than hear when two of them posture over a sandbar. Mostly it speaks in absence, suddenly quieter rookeries, suddenly emptier dawn ponds, suddenly shorter rodent foraging bouts measured by biologists with too many hours and not enough sleep. The silence is as diagnostic as the tracks. 4 prints, the forefeet big and weird, the hind feet smaller, all in a tidy line like a biped pretending to be a quadruped and doing a very good job. Humans adjust or pretend. Beach towns close hatching viewing nights, then open them again for the money, then close them after a public relations incident involving live television and a throat shaped like a funnel. Bird sanctuaries add canopy cover and discover that canopy changes the insect community and the water salinity, and suddenly the sanctuary is for a different set of birds. Ranchers build overhead wires at stock tanks to discourage giant glide-ins and accidentally invent pterosaur clotheslines. Lawsuits bloom. Engineers weep. The wires come down. Drones get banned for wildlife disturbance, which is polite for you're going to aim your Christmas present at a Cretaceous bayonet and lose. Storms are where it gets cinematic and mean. Thunderheads pump thermals like elevators. The pterosaur surfs to altitudes that turn the ground into a model train set. Lightning walks the horizon. Below, the front edge of the storm drives fish into river mouths and seabirds into tight, terrified flocks. The stalker drifts down the squall line's flank and plucks the exhausted, the wind-thrown, the broken-winged. When the rain rinses the salt from its pycnofiber fuzz and the sun snaps back on, it shakes like a tent and leaves wet outlines on the sand that look like somebody tried to fold a dragon. There's a romance to calling it a relic, as if its place is in a vitrine with climate control. But the world it wants still exists everywhere we take comfort in openness. Savannas, beaches, floodplains, salt pans. The rules are familiar. Lift at noon, shade at 3, panic at the water's edge. We built airports and wind farms and boardwalks on the same landscapes for the same reasons. Flatness, wind, lines of sight. We would be terrible roommates. Numbers make people itchy, so we keep them gentle. A wingspan large enough to eclipse a delivery van. A skull long enough to make a grown person step back without knowing why. A stride that covers ground like gossip. Weight. Light for the size, hollow bones earn their keep, but heavy enough that you feel it in your ribcage when it takes off nearby, the thump of air like a close-door slam. Speed, on the ground, that careful high-step prowl that looks slow until the peck happens. In the air, the unhurried sorcery of a glider, with a black belt in thermodynamics. If you need a final field note to file under habits you will adopt without admitting it, you will start looking up twice. Once for weather. Once for a line that isn't a cloud and isn't a plane, banking along the edge of the heat like a thought with bones. When you walk a beach, you will keep one eye on the long, thin horizon, where sky marries sea, because sometimes the horizon sprouts stilts and a javelin and begins to walk toward you in utter silence. You will tell yourself it is just a big bird. Then you will see it fold its wings and step over a gull, as if the gull were a rumour, and the ecosystem you thought you knew will feel suddenly like a story told by someone who left out the most important character on purpose. Begin with the wrong word people use: gentle. Nothing that weighs more than a city bus and chooses trees for breakfast is gentle. It is deliberate. It is the kind of calm that moves the world without raising its voice. A hornless rhinoceros lofted onto stilt legs and a crane's neck. Paraceratherium walked like a rumour of architecture. Pillar limbs, a barrel chest tuned for fermentation, a head that could browse where today only birds get to shop. If you need a number to feel it, picture a second-story window and an upper lip that steals leaves from it. Not a grazer. A stripper, leaf, twig, bark, to soft cambium, edited from the top down until the skyline blinked. Teeth tell on diets the way receipts tell on habits, low to middling crowns, ridges designed to mash wet greens and peel bark. Jaw joints that favour long grinding arcs, the upper lip, call it a proto-trunk if you're feeling poetic, or a prehensile rhino snoot if honesty tastes better, can pinch, twist and pry. The skull's nasal bones are pulled back, making room for that muscular handle. The neck vertebrae, long, pneumatic, light for their size, but cross-braced like bridges, and under all of it, legs built in columns, thick, straight, with joints tucked under the body so bone bears weight like a building, not like a cat. It didn't leap, didn't need to. Gravity was a treaty it had already signed. Drop one into a modern landscape and watch your assumptions get tidied into piles. Forest edges retract. Young trees disappear at exactly the height a ladder would make them safe. Shrubs graduate from screening to stubble. The canopy thins until sunlight hits the ground in places that used to be moss-lit. That's not scenery, that's a hydrology decision. More light means hotter soil, drier leaf litter, grass hoarding water during wet months and giving it back to the sky in a hurry. Shade-adapted ferns sulk. Saplings raised on patience die of optimism. Shrub-nesting birds lose their walls. Ground-nesting birds gain open sight lines and also a sudden awareness that there's no shade left to hide their mistakes. The soundtrack shifts from forest hiss to savanna click. Plants aren't passive in this. Thorn length inches upward in the species that can afford it. Some trees dump investment into chemicals that make their foliage taste like apology and metal. Others pivot to a growth strategy that accepts being eaten and bets on speed. Seeds adjust their contracts. Bigger, harder shells to survive a gut. Burrs that treat every passing leg like a taxi. Fruits that ripen on a schedule that catches the eye of a 3-ton courier. Because that's the other part you don't appreciate until you smell it. Dung as policy. Piles the size of ottomans, rich with broken leaf and bacterial ambition. Land like grants for anyone who can spend nitrogen. Dung beetles become aristocrats. Soil microbes sprint. Wildflowers stitch the edges of the road the animal leaves, and where those roads cross, you get bright explosions of growth that look suspiciously like the beginnings of a meadow. Roads, yes, it makes them, not asphalt, but intention beaten into earth day after season after decade. A body that large is a trail-building machine. The same route to the river. The same pass through the thorn. The same climb to the salt lick. Thousands of kilograms tamping soil into something that sheds water instead of drinking it. During rains, those paths become rivulets. In drought, they are the last open corridors between shrinking islands of forage. Everything learns to use them, gazelles, feral dogs, poachers, seed and rumour alike. On satellite images, you'd think a civil engineer got bored. On the ground, you notice that the trails skirt the oldest trees and bisect the brash newcomers. The architecture has critics. Waterholes turn into essays. A giant foot churns banks into slurry. Knees punch holes into clay that hold little pockets of liquid long after the surface dries. The animal drinks like it means it. Trunk-like lip scoops, tongue sluices, gallons vanish. Then comes the bathing, kneeling, buckling, a controlled collapse that sends mud sailing onto flanks where it dries to armour. The pool shallows, warms and becomes a brine. Fish concentrate, storks move in. Crocodilians, where they exist, weigh the math and decide calves might be a once-a-decade lottery win. By late dry season, the waterhole is a crater ringed with footprints that fossilise by afternoon. When the first storm of the wet arrives, those prints collect puddles, and seedlings choose them like apartments with good light. You think elephants are landscapers? They are. This is a contractor. It doesn't just break branches, it pushes. A shoulder into a sapling, a neck twist into a young trunk, and the tree learns to bow. Older, thicker stems hold, until one day they don't, and the crash writes a gap into the canopy big enough to feed back into weather at the scale of a valley. Wind runs a new route, fire finds easier paths, grasses muscle in, the mosaic tilts away from closed canopy forest toward open woodland and steppe. That's the vision. A Central Asian collage. Poplar galleries along rivers, tamarisk where salt kisses root, dwarf pistachio and wild almond taking the hills, now served at a height no living browser can reach and therefore rewritten. Who loses besides trees? Giraffes aren't here to complain and camels can't browse that high. Elk and deer pack up their dignity and head to greener trouble. Rhinos, modern ones, discover the hierarchy the first time that they find a favourite acacia trimmed to comedy. Horses, wild, feral, domesticated, find the new grass flushes delightful, and the returning fires less so. Predators see opportunity they mostly can't cash. Adults are safe in a way that makes tigers philosophical. Lions, Asiatic remnant or African import in some oil billionaire's dream park? Do mathematics and hunt elsewhere? Wolves and dholes smell calves and wake the old choreography in their legs. Bears consider a rush and choose berries. Only the very young, the very sick, the unlucky matter on the menu. The rest of the time, the mega herbivore is a weather system with knees. Digestive engineering underwrites the tyranny. Hindgut fermentation, the rhino way, a large, low-efficiency vat that trades perfect extraction for throughput. You don't chew cud, you move volume. Eat all day, sleep hard, let microbes do the overtime, and pay them in warm real estate. This is why the animal needs a map's worth of browse per season. Home ranges sprawl. Migration is less a romantic line than a slow orbit around rainfall and memory. In a poor year, the orbit widens. Fences become theology. Concrete canals argue with old paths. The result is predictable in the same way monsoons are predictable. They only surprise the people who built too close. Humans go from admiration to anecdotes to policy with boring speed. First the social media posts, saw the big one past the apricot grove, all lens flare and bad scale. Then the damage reports, mulberry shelter belt stripped, poplar saplings snapped, haystacks redistributed. Road departments discover that a 30-centimetre hoof print is a pothole with opinions. Highway patrol learns a new euphemism for totaled. Conservationists play the numbers game. How many hectares per animal? How many kilometres of corridor? How many villages need compensation schemes before huts learn to hate? The animal does not notice the paperwork. It notices whether the salt pan still glitters at noon. Parasites throw a party when giants move in. Ticks find the express lane. Biting flies learn patterns of shade along that neck and exploit the orchestra of capillaries below the skin. Birds that specialise in nipping and cleaning climb the social ladder. Starlings, miners, bulbuls, turning the animal into a mobile snack bar for feathered hygienists. Where it rubs itself on boulders, you get itch stones polished like river rock, passed down from mother to calf as landmarks, then stolen by people who like smooth omens and wonder why the hill erodes faster now. Reproduction is the slow drum. The animal is too big to gamble on quantity. One calf, maybe two in a lifetime, after a pregnancy so long you could plant trees and watch them fail while it ripens. Birth happens where the world feels least treacherous, a bend in a dry wash with escape ramps on three sides, or a patch of prairie with a view horizon so wide even paranoia can nap. The newborn stands like a foal, tries legs that belong to a future, and learns to aim that upper lip at soft leaves by copying a mother who eats and watches and eats and watches and naps like a landslide. Predators circle the idea of opportunity and are educated by a kick that could dent arguments. The calf grows between seasons, adding a new stratum of memory to the trail network, a low bypass here, an easier ford there, a favourite afternoon shade boulder that becomes family property. Fire learns from giants. More grass means fuel. More open wind means oxygen. Fires that once crept under shrubs in moody, slow lines start to run with long, tall flames that leap whole. Gullies and teach trees humility. In the short term, the mega herbivore is unbothered, the legs are long, the stride is authority. The nose reads smoke and chooses the upwind with the same calm it chooses everything. In the long term, the plant community flips towards species that burn and bounce back. Fire-adapted grasses become flagships. Nitrogen cycles quake and settle into new rhythms. Insects shift to match. Birds whose lives are timed to seed flushes track the beat if they can. Those that can't begin to vanish without ringing a bell first. The nutrient pump turns audible if you know how to listen. Bark stripped off willows along a river leaves pale scars that change sap flow and timing of leaf out. Late frost bites them because buds break early, And that tiny phonology error ripples into caterpillars hatching off schedule and chicks begging for meals that aren't ready. Meanwhile, the animal's shadow concentrates fertility. Dung islands dot the meadow like punctuation. Each a thesis defended by flies, and then by plants, and then by the beasts that eat those plants. Trails funnel rain. Rain funnels silt. Silt feeds roots. Roots hold banks. Banks change the river's mind about where it should braid in spring. A creature too large to hide ends up hiding in process. You don't see it. You see what it taught the place to do. Competition is mostly farce. Elephants roll in full of family and grievance and discover that height is an argument they can't win without tools. They push, it leans, they rumble, it exhales and keeps chewing. Giraffes would be theological rivals if they shared a continent. All hauteur and eyelashes, but they don't. And so the tallest browser gets the roof to itself. Domestic livestock discover that the new paths are easier to walk, the new grass is lovely after rain, and the new gates humans build to steer, the giant accidentally steer them too. Rangeland managers pretend that's what they intended. Disease sits at the edge of the frame like a nervous announcer clearing a throat. A body that big carries a microbiome with confidence. Most of its plagues are its own. Gut flora crashes, foot infections from long wet seasons, and things that slow it rather than explode it. But the constant cutting of branches and bark brings sap and bacteria into contact in new ways. Some trees sicken, cankers spread, orchards nearby catch it on the damp years. Wildlife conflict grows a fungus chapter and 2 panels on vectors. The animal moves through it all like a weather front, present, indifferent, consequential. Think about winter if you want a different shade of trouble. In snow, height is mercy. It can still feed where shorter mouths find only white noise. But frozen mud turns trails into skating rinks. Hooves cut through to ice. Ankles twist. The giant remembers it has a weight problem. It chooses ridges swept by wind and river corridors where warmth pools. Wolves paint themselves into its world again. Not for the adult, but for the halo of smaller ungulates now gathered on its safer routes. The mega herbivore doesn't notice the predators it inadvertently feeds. Physics and hunger shake hands over footprints. You keep asking whether it's aggressive. That's our need to place things on a cartoon scale. Try decisive. An animal this size doesn't rush. It proceeds. If you are between it and a salt lick, you will learn, very politely at first, to be elsewhere. If you park a motorcycle under the only shade tree for kilometres, you will discover that shade is an asset valued by the market. If you plant a line of poplar as a windbreak, you will one morning own a collection of beautifully sharpened stumps. There is no malice in any of this. There is only the sentence, "I am hungry and I go there," written in 20,000 newtons of gentle. Try for a minute to inhabit the daily clock. Pre-dawn, a slow rise, a shake that sends last night's dust into a personal weather system, a walk to the first brows as the east turns metal. Morning, leaf raking, step, a pause to rub on a stone older than stories, the stone shines a little more. Midday, belly full, find a hill crest where wind shaves heat from skin, and watch the world lower its voice. Afternoon, a detour to the mineral lick, tongue-rasping clay until a deficiency shuts up. Evening, back to brush-shadowed banks, a drink that lowers the river inch by inch, a stand where mosquitoes change their minds because the skin is mud paint and the wind is friend. Night, the body switches from gathering to making, microbes churn, heat blooms, the animal dozes standing, then kneels, then breathes like a bellows under stars that are not impressed. If you wanted to see a food web break without blood, you could do worse than watch this quiet bulldozer go to work. Not a crash, a tilt, not a slaughter, a budget revision, shade species fade, light lovers sing. Browsers that once owned the mid-canopy find the menu already chewed. Grazers throw a party until fires start attending. Predators lose their easy ambush cover and get lean or get clever. Scavengers track dung and newborns like map pins. Somewhere a stream runs clearer because banks are armoured by roots, encouraged by dung. Somewhere else a stream runs dirt because trails learn to be rivers. The place is still itself, only rewritten in a bigger hand. People will tell stories because that's what we do when scale refuses to fit in a sentence. The old grey in the Kizilkum, who took a shepherd's entire mulberry hedge in one night and left a trail of stools that sprouted sunflowers. The widow of the Pange who knocked down the disused watchtower as if taking offence at nostalgia. The three sisters who travel together always and learn to push open the same swinging pipeline gate that no one can figure out how to lock. Kids will draw them with tusks because scale and tusks share the same draw in a young brain. Elders will add them to proverbs that advise patience and warn against building fences that face the wind. And then one dawn, after a dust-stormed night, you stand on a ridge in a place that used to be quiet forest and is now honest grass, and you watch a grey line move below you. 3 humps from this angle. Rump, shoulders, head. The head lifts. A sapling disappears with a gentle ripping sound. Birds follow like punctuation. Flies wobble in the sun around its knees. It stops at a salt lick and scrapes the ground with a foot the size of a serving platter, then leans down, tongue out, and tastes the earth like it's verifying a signature. The world around it is not ruined, it is reassigned. And if you listen hard enough, you can hear all the smaller lives in earshot changing their schedules by a few minutes to make room for an appetite that moves like weather and leaves like weather, and will come back absolutely on time until the map itself has learned its name. Start with the map as you know it. Oceans in blue, rivers like nerves, marshes as smudges, continents in stubborn colours, and then imagine a hand reaching down to stir, not hard, just enough to make borders wobble. That's what happens when you don't reintroduce one tyrant but several, each tuned to a different part of the machine. None of them need a manifesto. They bring thermodynamics and appetite. They bring gravity and geometry. You can hear the web creak before anything snaps. At sea, the first edit is subtraction by punctuation. The whale eaters write in events, not averages. A calf lost on a Tuesday, a mother wasting 2 extra weeks to nurse a smaller survivor, a pod that reroutes 80 kilometres offshore to avoid a corridor that smells like reasons. Fewer calves means fewer adults 5 years from now. Fewer adults means fewer iron-rich plumes at the surface. Fewer plumes mean plankton blooms that run late or never quite arrive. The ocean's fertilizer budget goes short. Krill numbers wobble. Fish that time their larval drift to those blooms hatch into a calendar that isn't there. It's not a famine, just a gentle misalignment that turns lunch into waiting. In the waiting, someone else starves. Now slide down the continental shelf to where tide becomes river, and the water changes languages mid-sentence. This is where the ambushers write law. The brackish king parks itself under a bridge and turns the estuary's mixing zone into a shadows with rules. Everything that used to stayed there, juvenile fish acclimating to salt, dolphins trenching the mud for mullet, birds using the mudflats like buffets, learns to make its decisions faster and worse. Meanwhile, the river tyrant with the sail runs patrols like a border guard with gills, pinching schools against bars and eating the punctuation out of any migration that still dares to have commas. If the sea has fewer whales and a nervous schedule, the river has fewer fish and a new silence. The two edges don't merely meet, they complicate one another. A fish that dodges the sail upriver hits the crocodilian lottery downstream. A seal that flees an empty, risky rookery offshore noses into the estuary's brown water and becomes a rumour with whiskers. Keeps sliding inland until the water forgets its salt and remembers mosquitoes. The swamp looks unchanged until you translate it into hours. The big snake doesn't depopulate, it reschedules. Capybaras eat 10 minutes earlier in the dawn grey and spend the missing 10 bolting. Caimans bask less, birds commute more. The dog that used to nap on the canoe dock sleeps under a roof. When the river tyrant drives fish into side channels, the snake waits in side channels. When the snake thins the mid-tier predators, crustaceans enjoy a brief boom, and then algae says thank you and turns the water into soup. A bloom crashes overnight. Oxygen vanishes. Fish gasp at the surface and draw in scavengers, which draw in the amphibious architect beneath the bridge, who considers this whole scene a generous endorsement of his career choice. Meanwhile, on land, there's a quiet earthquake in green. The giant browser that edits treetops into daylight does not roam like a myth, it commutes like a habit. Trails harden, canopies thin, herb layers pivot to sun-tolerant, fast-recovering, flashy species that think in seeds and fire. Shade specialists fade without drama. Grasses like the new funding climate and throw their votes for frequent quick fires that reward grasses. Insects shift with the plants. Birds shift with the insects. Small predators track the new commute patterns. The old forest becomes a memory draped on open woodland. The new woodland hums with edges, ecotones everywhere, interfaces upon which specialists perch with optimism and are often eaten by a pterosaur that arrived 3 hours early. And yes, the stilted glider walks the seam between all of it like a tax auditor with the sky for a cubicle. Seabird colonies that were already paying the whale tax, fewer fish schooling near the surface, longer trips, now pay the hatchling tax. Inland ground nesters pay a separate fee. The silence of midday is no longer safe. The shadow that doesn't flap isn't a cloud. Even carrion is regulated. Show up too late to a beaching and find a beak signing the ledger with your rations. Where the big snake has pushed rodents into later hours, the pterosaur learns dusk routes the same way you memorize where you set your keys. It doesn't need to fly often to own mornings. The cascades begin to cross-pollinate. Fewer whales mean fewer whalefalls. Deep-sea scavenger guilds tighten belts. Surface scavengers, gulls, skuas, work harder and risk more, which means more bodies on beaches where the ground stalker patrols, which means fewer scavengers next year and a little more rot along the tide line. Rot breeds flies and beetles that the shorebirds would love to eat, except the shorebirds had a bad year because the pterosaur moved into their zip code with a neck like a question mark and answers that peck. The shorebird's bad year is the fox's bad winter. The fox's bad winter is the mouse's excellent spring. The mouse's excellent spring is the farmer's new plague. The farmer's new plague is the snake's summer of plenty. Any surprise that the estuary ambusher enjoys the runoff from the fields sprayed to fix the mice? The fertilizer flows, the algae bloom, the oxygen drops, the fish stagger, the jaws close. Everyone's aware they're solving the wrong problem too late. Back upriver, the sail-chested hunter and its crocodilian neighbour invent a duet. The fish that used to hold at the mixing zone bolt upstream prematurely, bumping into the tyrant's patient cross-current trap. Survivors that panic downstream meet coin slot nostrils. The river's energy doesn't vanish. It puddles in odd places, backwaters rioting with minnows, main channels ghosted by hunger. Otters that used to own the bends pivot to crayfish and get lean. When winter pinches, they wander into farm ponds where the giant snake keeps office hours and learns the taste of boldness. On the plain, fire learns to run. The browser keeps the ladder fuels low. Grasses feed the flames. Winds do the rest. Fire-stressed trees that once nursed the banks now cough up their roots, and rain grabs silt like a pickpocket and dumps it where rivers lose patience. Sandbars, deltas, estuaries already on the edge. The brackish king loves a delta with new angles and fresh logs to stash meat beneath. The river tyrant loves the turbidity that blinds fish and increases panic. The pterosaur loves the blackened edges where rodents break cover. The snake loves the shallow, warm flood that follows. The browser walks through the ash, ears flicking, upper lip pulling green from the first arrogant sprigs. The feedback loop puts on muscle. Predator politics matter because kings hate overlap. Here's how the board settles without the cinematic brawls you paid for. The whale eaters partition highways. One favours canyon heads, the other rides open shelves. Their territories brush without sparking. The sail-finned fisher owns current seams. The brackish giant owns edges where fresh lies to salt. They clash only when a flood sets them on the same page, and then both decide they have better places to be. The snake and the crocodilian share a religion called stillness, and tithe to it by never moving at the same time under the same dock. The groundstalker lifts meals out from under foxes, coyotes, jackals with such casual authority that nobody files a complaint. The browser ignores everybody until calves are born, then wolves and doles relearn or everyone survives by studying everyone else's calendar. Humans try to fix it with nouns, reserve, corridor, deterrent, quota. The sea responds with verbs, scatter, delay, starve, move. Whale watching closes and reopens with new rules, then closes again after the footage that trends for a week and dies like everything dies on the internet. Fisheries switch gears and species. Some collapse. Others pivot and sell river sardines with rebranded labels and stubborn hope. Estuary towns build more lights. Fishermen carry more flares. Tourists take more photos of warning signs than of sunsets. Inland, ranchers string overhead wires across stock ponds to keep the glider honest, and the glider learns to approach crosswind. Farmers plant windbreaks, the browser eats to the seam. Insurance companies invent a rider for prehistoric interference and raise premiums until premiums do what no predator could, push people away from the edge. Travellers notice first that the world has started to look different without quite knowing why. Coastlines feel empty of birds but loud with insects. Rivers look fat with silt but thin with splashes. Wetlands shine with sudden oily stillness at strange hours. Savannas wave taller and narrower. The horizon occasionally stands up. The smell changes too. A little more rot on the wind off a harbour, a little more smoke baked into noon, a little more dung in the shade where the grass is sweetest. You suspect nothing until the day you realise you haven't seen a certain kind of gull in months, and your favourite river bend makes your spine cold for no reason. The reason has a name, and it has been there the whole time, writing its lesson plan in fear. Cascade also climb up invisible ladders. Parasite loads reassign themselves. Ticks ride the browser's highways, and with them ride the bacteria that make doctors sigh. The pterosaur grooms those ticks off by accident when it bathes in salt pans and leaves a temporary oasis for things that can handle brine. Shrimp, flies, everything that eats shrimp and flies. In the sea, fewer whales mean fewer lice, fewer amphipods that used to live on them, fewer weird little obligate hitchhikers that nobody writes children's books about. Look long enough and you realise the world is held together by relationships you'd be embarrassed to mention at dinner. You can hear them snapping if you get very quiet. Even weather learns new tricks. Fewer whales pumping nutrients into the surface mean less drawdown of carbon in some places. The ocean exhales just a little more and keeps just a little less, and their climate teeters on numbers that don't care about your feelings. Inland, more grass and more fire loft and more soot, which seeds more clouds which rain in inconvenient places and not where the browser expected. Rivers pulse differently, peaks later in the season, lingering longer, leading to fish that miss their cues and birds that hatch on faith and find the menu late. Storms push surge farther upriver, where the brackish king waits with the patience of a stone. The tide takes homes, and the insurance rider learns new words. The best part, if you like horror with your science, is that you don't need mass death for a break. You need mistiming. Think in minutes. The whales dive 3 minutes earlier and linger deeper. The fish run the shallows 2 minutes shorter at dusk. The hatchlings get one less minute of dark to cross sand because the moon rose bright and the pterosaur was already walking. The capybaras drink 90 seconds faster and swallow water that carries more eggs of parasites that bloom in the warm flood left by the new sediment pulses. The browser spends 12 fewer minutes under the only patch of shade because a fence doesn't care about dignity. Accumulate enough minutes with teeth and the year is different. Accumulate enough different years and the biome is somebody else. If there's a chorus that develops, it's a line you'll get tired of hearing but never escape. Energy does not disappear, it changes address. Fat that used to be a whale calf at the shelf edge becomes a shark that never quite gets to be big because the big shark lives there now and edits ambitions. Fish protein that used to trampoline up a river becomes a crocodilian that naps through the heat and feeds flies that feed swallows that feed a snake's attention in the evening. Leaves that used to shade a stream become fuel for a fire that becomes ash, that becomes a grass flush, that becomes a calf, that becomes a wolf's winter. The system still balances, it just balances on a different knife. You could try to manage it like a flowchart. Cap predators, protect nurseries, fence rookeries, engineer fish passages that outwit a sail and a smile and a coil, but a flowchart is a lie that says causation sits in a straight chair. The truth is that place itself has a memory, and these animals are very good at reading it and writing new chapters. The estuary remembers where the deep scours reform after every flood. The pterosaur remembers which levee throws thermals at 10. The browser remembers which hill breaks wind from the east and which salt pan tastes like magnesium and which orchard is guarded by a farmer who sleeps hard. The snake remembers which dock lights attract the fish that come with thunder. The river tyrant remembers the sound a school makes when it's about to accept a mistake. You can't permit that. You can witness it. One evening, all of it converges in a way no model would allow because models have to sleep. A storm line lifts birds into a grey ribbon over a cape where whales used to rest. Out of that ribbon a few exhausted bodies fall. The pterosaur steps out of the haze and writes a lesson on the sand. Offshore, a calf makes a sound like a door closing. The sea writes the same lesson in blue. Upriver, the tide from the storm backs into the marsh floats a herd of rodents onto a bank that trembles and resolves into muscle. The water writes the lesson in green. On the plain, wind eats flame and flame eats grass, and the pet's browser waits on the black, reading the first green as if it had invented it. Somewhere under a bridge a ripple stops meaning nothing, and a fisherman who has always known the river without thinking suddenly holds still and decides this time to go home early. The map looks the same tomorrow. That's the trick. Cascades don't advertise, they accrue. The coastline, inch by inch, becomes less noisy with wings and more busy with flies. The river trades glitter for colour. The marsh becomes a rumour. The plain becomes a clock. The air learns to cast a darker kind of shadow. If you're looking for a break, you won't see a snapped chain. You'll see choreography. You'll see an old orchestra return tuned to a lower note and lead the whole world one step off the beat you thought was nature. We don't survive by winning. We survive by changing the question. You don't outmuscle deep time. You mark lanes around it. You put lights on the edges, and you teach your children a new grammar that keeps them whole. The first human policy isn't a law or a treaty. It's the quiet habit of not putting your body in the wrong water at the wrong hour. After that, we build theatre. Red flags, sirens, apps that ping your wrist with blue alert, calves sighted, predation risk high. There will be dashboards that look like weather radar, except the storm cells are living. Coasts blink first. Speed limits for ships spread like band-aids. 10 knots through migration corridors, cameras on the bows, fines tall enough to make captains grimace and slow anyway. Harbours install quiet hours, not for neighbours but for whales, throttling traffic at dawn and dusk to cut the risk of chaos. Whale watching pivots to whale waiting. anchored blinds in deep, controlled coves with rangers who say the word no like a prayer. Fishermen switch mesh, swap seasons, except that the shelf edge is a courthouse where the old apex signs its name on their quotas. Fish pens sprout near a shore, hung with strobe lights and bubble curtains that make predators blink the way you and I flinch when someone claps by our ear. Do the giants care? Briefly. Deterrents teach lessons until the lesson becomes furniture. Electric fields? Annoying this week, normal next week. Pingers and air cannons? Scary until the big ones map them to empty nets and detour like commuters who know which streets host speed traps. The ocean is an arms race conducted with calories. We invent dynamic ocean management, moving zones that open and close like gills depending on real-time data from satellites, drones, and a grid of hydrophones listening for the signature thump of massive tails. You'll be able to watch it on your phone. Green corridors, orange cautions, a red pulse that means a calf just stopped being a calf. Logistics departments subscribe. Surfers grumble and learn to love lakes. Rivers become paperwork wrapped in mud. You can't put a gate in a river, but we try. Bubble curtains and staccato sounds startle bars at fish ladders. Electric weirs that nudge schools toward channels the sailback hunter hates. Deep refuges dredged into side pools with boulder gardens where current dies and ambush geometry gets ugly for anything longer than a caiman. The bridges get signs in 3 languages and a 4th one called fear. No night fishing, no dogs off leash, no cleaning your catch where the water smells like pennies. Boat ramps sprout solar-lit poles that throw shadows weirdly across the surface. If you've met the coin slot nostrils under a ramp once, you'll understand the charity in that. Wetlands grow fences that aren't for keeping giants out so much as for keeping us honest. Boardwalks raised higher, with railings you can't dangle your feet through no matter how poetic the sunset. Rangers carry thermal scopes instead of binoculars, scanning for coils and ridgelines where the water should be blank. The technology people build toys, drones that see heat, drones that smell DNA, drones that drop non-lethal pepper-scent bombs into channels to convince a constrictor that dinner walked away. It works when it works. When it doesn't, the drone vanishes into a swirl that looks like water forgetting your last name. On the plains and in the scrub, the quiet bulldozer from the Miocene writes land use plans for us. Fences migrate from barrier to suggestion, brace taller and stronger, until one day you notice the gate swings both ways because everyone decided to stop pretending. Windbreaks are replanted as living palisades, thorned species layered like bad intentions, to buy orchards a few seasons before the upper lip finds the seam. Conservation moves from romance to triage without pausing for denial. You pick colonies to save and colonies to praise in past tense. You don't protect everything. You prioritise. Turtle beaches with the highest recruitment when roped off under netted tunnels at night. Seabird islets that keep their rookery status because a ranger sleeps there with a dog that knows how to bark at shadows with wings. Airports learn new humility. Bird radar becomes pterosaur radar, the software patched for targets that return as entire constellations of bone and membrane. Glide paths get rerouted away from midday thermals. Construction cranes earn warning pennants that flicker like giant streamers to keep a hunting shadow from treating the site like a buffet. There are new closures you'll hear on the radio, deadpan and unreal. Runway 26 is shut down due to megafauna in the approach corridor. Wind farms learn to curtail at dawn and dusk on heat-heavy days. Blades still sometimes meet leather, and every time they do, the paperwork afterward looks like a species impact statement that swallowed a eulogy. Insurance companies do the thing they're built for. They write the future down as invoices. Premiums climb for houses near estuaries and beaches where the rookeries used to be. Marinas add surcharges for seasonal predation indices. Fishing fleets get rebates for AI cameras that verify bycatch and shut nets when the algorithm says something with a sail or a smile is within 100 meters. The actuarial tables discover chapters titled Prehistoric Interference and Apex Proximity, and the people who can't pay the table's opinions move inland the way tide pulls a footprint flat. Law follows Leighton sideways. Maritime treaties add corridors the way cities add bike lanes badly. River bodies write giant crocodilian hazard into navigation charts with a straight face. Wildlife agencies hire sociologists because conflict isn't just about animals, it's about time and pride and whether a boat ramp feels like a birthright. Courts hear cases that sound like fables. A farmer sued for electrifying his orchard fence after the tall grey browser pushed it down and ate 10 years of graft. A coastal council fined for letting tourists watch a hatchling run turn into a lesson in predation on live TV. The rulings find a rhythm, coexist if you can, retreat if you must, compensate when you fail to think ahead. Yes, the word cull shows up like a bad relative who always thinks he can fix dinner by adding knives. Some places try it. Some politicians run on it and win, then meet a committee of biologists holding graphs that say you can't prune a force of nature without turning it into something nastier, fewer, smarter, bolder. Others propose contraception, gene drives, engineered diseases in whispers. The room gets quiet and stays there because every adult knows spills don't stay in the glass. The serious conversation drifts towards buffers and budgets. Keep prey populations robust enough that the giants don't chew through to collapse. Leave corridors wide enough that the hunt stays moving and predictable. Teach people to read water the way their great-grandparents did, when they didn't flatter themselves that everything with a horizon belonged to them. The landscape of fear graduates from ecology lecture to civic culture. Coastal towns post their new commandments like weathered creeds. Don't swim on a bloom tide, don't launch at dusk on a neap. Don't fill it by the water. Don't stand where you can't see your feet. Don't believe your dog when he says the river is a friend. Kids play a schoolyard game called Shadow. One is the pterosaur walking straight and silent, the others are hatchlings freezing or sprinting on a count of 3. Somebody's abuelo teaches them how to spot a bow wave that doesn't bow, how to read birds when birds are reading the water, how to listen for thin quiet, the kind that means everything with a pulse held its breath at once. Science builds a surveillance cathedral because that's what science knows how to do when it's scared and funded. Fibre optic cables along the seafloor become ears that hear tailbeats as vibrations in glass. Smart boys breathe the water and spit back numbers. Oxygen dips, chlorophyll surges, iron whispers that a whale passed uptide. Planes carry hyperspectral cameras that can see a calf's shadow 12 meters down. Machine learning stares at turbulent river surface and picks out the ripple signature of a hidden spine. There's an alert tone for each. An ululation in your pocket that means don't wade. A soft chime that means stay off the jetty. A low, patient bong from the harbour master's tower that means the big one is patrolling and will be for hours. It feels like living inside a heart monitor. It is. Technology tries edge cases too. Glow nets that shine at frequencies fish see and the sail hunter hates. Flexible fishways that can change pattern nightly, like a safe combination so nothing with a habit can stake them out. Overhead wire ceilings for stock ponds to keep the stilted glider from making parachutes out of lambs. Some work, some create other problems, bats tangling in the wires, fish refusing the new lights, the glider learning to use the wind to enter at a stupid angle no engineer predicted, because engineers hate tricks and physics loves them. Economies pivot into weird shapes. Jellyfish get a celebrity decade because nothing else wants to be a jellyfish, and they bloom when food webs wobble. Oyster and mussel farms spread across bays once reserved for sailboats. Filter feeders do what filters do, mask a little of the mess and sell it as brine on ice with lemon. River towns start catching crayfish like it's a fashion. Beach tourism decouples from water. Look but don't touch becomes a business model, with boardwalks, bird blinds and night vision rentals. Insurance money fuels a boom in inland recreation. Lakefront property listings double their fonts. People buy canoe helmets, nobody laughs. Militaries pretend it's not their problem until it is. Submarines hate the new sonar etiquette. Brownwater patrols add steel mesh skirts to thwart ambushes from below in channels that were once boring. Pilots memorize thermal map briefings that look like topography, but actually show afternoon lift where a giant with a javelin face might be drifting at their altitude. Disaster response teams train alongside biologists. Storm surge rescues run in rivers where the coin slot landlord claimed the underbridge eddy. Helicopters keep enough altitude to insult pterosaurs silently. The most professional people in the room grow a habit of glancing at the sky before they step off the skid. Health departments sidle into the story sideways, as they do. Parasites follow feces. Feces follow giants. Water treatment plants add screens and protocols they didn't need last year. Tick-borne diseases climb in counties that never had to run PSAS about tucking pants into socks. You start seeing small, grumpy clinics at river mouths and boat ramps where nurses hand out dewormers for dogs and pamphlets for people that are written in the tone adults use when they love you but fear your confidence. Culture does what culture does. Mythologizes, then monetizes, then matures. There are songs about the old shark and the whale with teeth that sound like lullabies if you don't understand the words. There are pilgrimage walks along the high boardwalks at rookeries, where the glider strolls mornings, quiet as a stone, and visitors finally understand why silence can feel like an animal. There are inevitably stupid internet videos of men in shorts at midnight poking the eyes they imagined and finding the eyes were further away. And there are also the good stories. The dockhand who saw the flat wrong shadow and shouted, the family that pulled their net and went home and learned they liked the taste of caution, the ranger who slept on the beach and woke the pterosaur with a hiss so the turtles made it that night, the kid who built a school project that used cheap microphones to hear tailbeats and got the mayor to move the ferry. Laws turn kinder toward knowledge. Indigenous river knowledge that was treated like folklore gets codified into policy. Don't fish the bend when frogs stop singing. Don't night cross when the moon drops into the reeds. Don't trust a wind that carries sweet rot. Elders who once got asked to bless openings get hired to schedule closings. The best managers learn to say, "We don't know" on camera, without flinching, then pay for the fieldwork that makes that sentence temporary. And still, even with all the steel and software and pamphlets and prayer, the real adaptation is interior. We relearn the weight of maybe. We put "I don't swim there" in the same drawer as "I don't touch the hot pan," and "I don't stare down thunderstorms." We accept the cost of awe. You keep a candle of attention lit at the back of your skull and feed it with glances at shadow angles and wind. And you do not resent it because of what it saves. You adopt new rituals because they are cheap compared to being wrong. Clap before you step from the bank, tie the dog, check the app, check the birds, go around. Survival turns out not to be a Netflix climax, but a calendar. Zoning meetings where the map nudges a line uphill. Morning briefings where the harbour master points at red zones and a dozen skippers nod and reroute. School assemblies where a ranger holds up a tooth the size of your palm and says "don't make it your story." Quiet mornings when a rancher rattles a bucket of bolts along a fence to warn the tall grey neighbour off the saplings, and both of them get to keep their day. It's not triumph, it's tenancy with terms. There will be places we abandon because the rent is too high in fear or money. There will be places we defend because losing them would change our own shape too much. There will be days when a beach is closed and the horizon is empty, and still the closing feels right because an old, precise kind of caution has returned to the species. The same one that kept your ancestor from sleeping in tall grass that smelled wrong. In that sense, yes, we survive. We move a little slower and look a little harder. We let older laws breathe through the newer ones. And sometimes in the last light, you'll watch a long, old silhouette pass between you and the sun, and feel, beneath the nerves and the policy and the plans, that we didn't lose the world. We found out how little of it we ever owned,